Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering companies panic as Supreme Court rules against woke DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from Bloomberg, the Supreme Court just complicated employer diversity initiatives. Rights groups say the court made it easier to sue employers. Lawyers warn the ruling may also threaten diversity programs. This is going to decimate diversity programs. It may not eliminate diversity programs, but it now has placed legal liability on every company that has diversity programs. They had it before. Now they have much more legal liability, and we'll get into it in detail. From the Washington Post, Supreme Court makes it easier to file workplace discrimination claims. Also from the Washington Post, and this was before the case was decided, it just was decided yesterday. Supreme Court case could spark rush of reverse discrimination claims. The Washington Post doesn't even like the expression reverse discrimination, but they have to mention it now in several articles because it is what it is. It's when you discriminate against anyone who is not a protected class of the diversity, equity, and inclusion cult. Coming from Bloomberg, the Supreme Court just complicated employer diversity initiatives. The U.S. Supreme Court's ruling that a St. Louis police sergeant can sue over a job transfer that she claims was discriminatory was championed by human rights groups as an enormous win for workers. However, hours after the decision, lawyers were warning that the outcome could have a chilling effect on employers' diversity initiatives because it adds to questions about what's legal. And they know what they're doing is not legal. This has been going on for a long time now. From Bloomberg, business is booming for DEI lawyers as corporate America asks, what's legal? These are all some very sophisticated people. Anyone in any kind of a corporate job, are very sophisticated people. They're well aware what they're doing is not legal. It's just that if everyone does it, they can get away with it. Up until the point where the Supreme Court says, hold on a second. There's a limit to the discrimination that you can do against people, and they define it in this decision, and we'll get into that decision, but it really opens these companies up to getting in serious trouble. And it's not really a defense for them to say, oh, you know something? We were doing this last month, but we changed our policy. We just did this 2 years ago, but we stopped doing it now. They could all stop doing the discrimination right now, and of course they should. But whatever they've already done, they're responsible for. They can't just say, oh, sorry, we didn't know. They need to know. If you discriminate against somebody, saying, oh, I didn't realize it wasn't allowed is not going to work at the corporate level. And it's not going to work in a court of law. Jatonya Clayborn Muldrow, that's this lady, sued the city of St. Louis after she was reassigned from the department's intelligence division on public corruption and human trafficking cases to join a job in the city's 5th district. Though she was paid the same, she said she had to start working weekends, had less prestigious assignments, and lost access to high-profile people. In short, she argued, the transfer was negative for her, and it was made on the basis of sex. Workplace discrimination due to sex or other protected characteristics like race, color, religion, or national origin is illegal. But courts across the country have disagreed about how substantial the unequal treatment must be to merit a legal claim. In this case, the city argued that Muldrow's lateral move at the same pay grade wasn't significantly harmful enough to meet the standard. The Supreme Court disagreed, saying an employee just needed to show some harm under the terms of their employment, but it doesn't need to be material, substantial, or serious. That's a much lower bar or burden to have to reach to say you've been discriminated against. You don't have to say this ruined my life, this cut my salary in half. This made it impossible for me to work at the company anymore. The Supreme Court has now said, just demonstrate that you were impacted because of your race, your color, religion, or sexual preference. And that's enough to sue whoever's doing that to you. The decision makes it easier for workers to sue over discriminatory job transfers. It says job transfers, and yes, her specific case was a job transfer, but of course it has to also do with promotions on the job, getting special training for a job. It blows up the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion scam. Some employment lawyers say the same reasoning could be carried over to workplace development programs or employee resource groups designed to benefit traditionally underrepresented cohorts. For example, a fellowship that accepts only Hispanic students or a leadership program only open to women. Quote, could you say that exclusion from participation in a mentoring or leadership program materially disadvantages someone? Asks Jonathan Siegel, a partner specializing in employment and labor law at Duane Morris. Even before the opinion, Siegel was advising companies to get rid of development programs that only allow people of protected groups to participate, he said. Now he says the risk is even higher. And his question here is even higher than the standard that an employee has to meet. For example, he says here, does exclusion in one of these leadership programs or mentoring programs materially disadvantage someone? That's not the question you need to be asking, because the standard is below material, substantial, or serious. All you have to show is some harm. And the answer is yes, of course. If you're not allowed to move up at your company, if you're not allowed to get a job because of your skin color, because of your religion, because of your sexual preference, it doesn't fit some agenda they're trying to push at that company. It's illegal. You can't do it anymore. And these affinity groups are being shut down. From Bloomberg, latest victim of diversity backlash, your workplace affinity group. A mainstay since the 1970s, employee resource groups are caught up in the battle against woke capitalism. As well they should be. Just make it fair and equal for everyone. If you want to give new people a chance, or if you want to give additional chances to people that are not successful at work, you can do that. You can form a group for that. You can put extra training resources into that. You just can't limit people's participation in that based on their race, their gender, or their sexual preferences anymore. The Supreme Court's decision to overturn affirmative action in college admissions last year prompted executives across the country to re-examine their diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI programs. At the same time, conservative legal groups refocused their attentions on corporations, arguing that some initiatives meant to benefit marginalized groups amount to reverse discrimination. And of course they do. You can't discriminate against people and think you're going to get away with it. Not in the United States of America. This whole DEI thing was just a crazy fad, and now it's coming to an end. Not literally now, but soon. It's moving in the right direction. Though the racial justice group Legal Defense Fund praised the ruling, Senior Economic Justice Counsel Pilar Whitaker acknowledged opponents of DEI programs likely, quote, will see this as an opening to launch new attacks on diversity programs. Yes, Ms. Whitaker, you best believe it. Wait until they see what America First Legal does with this decision. She's among lawyers who believe that anyone seeking to sue for being excluded from a program will face steep hurdles in proving that being left out hurts them. Quote, the court reaffirmed that challengers must establish harm or injury in a term or condition of employment, said Lauren Hartz, co-chair of the DEI Protection Task Force, which does sound like a superhero group, but it's not, at law firm Jenner & Block. In her view, that won't be easy to prove, but will still open the door to more lawsuits. She's being ridiculous, and also she's selling services. So what she's saying from the Jenner & Block law firm is, hire our law firm. I've seen their name all over these articles. We've got a diversity, equity, and inclusion task force. We're the protection task force. Write us massive checks, and we'll give you some legal advice to try to rely on. But it's not going to work. Not when even the lefties, this was a 9-0 decision. Even the lefties on the Supreme Court said, no, you don't need to show material, substantial harm. You need to show some harm, like a little disadvantage. And if you tell me that a training program that costs money, training programs aren't free. Companies have to pay for them too. They give it to the employee for free, but that's a free benefit that you can gain as a skill, get a credential, and then have more opportunity at that company as well as even other companies. To say that's not going to be considered a benefit, to say that's not going to be considered that you get some harm because you're getting less opportunity because of your skin color, I don't think that's really going to work. But they will still be able to sell their legal services for another year or two. That much is true. Her law firm is advising companies to carefully document changes to employee schedules, perks, and assignments to ensure that they can later show the moves weren't discriminatory, even when in most cases, of course, they were. but she has a client to protect and a check to cash. The ruling is a double-edged sword, says David Glasgow, executive director for the Meltzer Center, which studies DEI law at New York University. Quote, it may become a bit easier to challenge DEI programs, but it will also be a bit easier to bring traditional discrimination claims, such as the one Muldrow brought against St. Louis. What Glasgow is pointing out here is that yes, there will be less diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, but there will be opportunities that if you are discriminated against because of your gender, like this police officer was discriminated against because she was a female, at least according to her, she can sue for that and she can get compensated for that, or she can get put back into the position that she was entitled to have. That's legitimate. That's rule of law stuff that applies to everyone. That's a good thing. Discrimination based on race for the benefit of diversity, equity, and inclusion is a bad thing. And that's what's coming to an end. Here's what's also coming to an end from Bloomberg. Latest victim of diversity backlash, your workplace affinity group. Now, me personally, I don't mind the idea of indigenous people, women, LGBT people, white people, any kind of people. If they want to have an affinity group at work, that's fine. It's not something that should be sponsored by companies. Companies shouldn't be putting resources into it. But if people want to gather their own resources, that's okay. It's kind of like if you're at work and people want to all chip in to buy a birthday present for someone and it's not required. You can if you want to. You don't have to if you don't want to. Maybe you chip in for a birthday cake. You can get together and do things at work. And sure, if indigenous people or Jewish people or Spanish people or whatever kind of people you are want to have a group at work that you socialize with, all that is fine. But the company doesn't need to get involved with sponsoring it. And it looks like that's coming to an end. The call goes out routinely to America's rainbow workforce, to employees who are Black, Hispanic, Asian, Indigenous, women, and LGBT. Come and join an employee resource group that's tailored to you. Only now, after decades of growth, these popular company organizations are coming in for new scrutiny, along with just about every other diversity initiative in business and academia today, which is great news. We're not rid of this yet, but we're getting rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is coming. It's going in the right direction. Budgets are getting cut. Diversity teams being paired. Priorities are shifting, in some cases drastically, along with the business outlook. Across corporate America, companies in sectors from technology to industrial manufacturing are cutting jobs as they grapple with rising costs amid stubbornly high inflation and interest rates. Some employees are starting to wonder, will joining these groups, corporate fixtures since the 1970s, really help my career? Or if the wind shifts, and the wind is shifting, you can feel it, could these affiliations somehow hurt? Yeah, they could go that way because people want to see merit. People want to see accomplishment. They want to see what you've achieved on your job. We're all in a competitive environment. We all really kind of compete with each other. And competition is not necessarily a bad thing. Let's all do great work. Let's all be inspired to do even better work. Major corporations insist they're as committed as ever to fostering inclusive workspaces. But recent developments, many of them driven by the conservative backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion, suggest some businesses are edging away from promises to level the playing field. It's impossible to have equality of outcome. There is no leveling the playing field. You have to accomplish what you can accomplish. There's just so much your company can do to give you a leg up to do that. And now, thanks to this new lawsuit and this new decision from the Supreme Court, companies really have their hands tied behind their back. They can't give you opportunities based on some indigenous profile. It's got to be equally offered to everyone. The proportion of U.S. companies that fund a DEI function, which oversees ERGs, is set to drop to just 20% by the end of this year, compared with 33% in 2022. Thanks to layoffs that disproportionately affect DEI teams, according to Forrester Research. And why is it affecting DEI teams? Not because there probably aren't some nice people that work in the DEI department, but it's a nonsense department. It doesn't add value to the workforce, to the company, to the community. It just creates friction. And friction is the enemy of any system or organization, whether a physical system or a social system. ERGs, that's employee resource groups, these affinity groups, are a big deal for countless U.S. workers. For decades now, these groups have been a key way for corporations to demonstrate their commitment to diversity. For example, they provided a safe space where underrepresented workers could commiserate and which is complain, I guess, and strategize within the otherwise homogenous white male workforce. What do you mean strategize what? Just do your work. How many ERGs are out there? Hard to tell, but companies like Microsoft and Walmart have 9 each listed on their website. Amazon has 13. A typical budget for companies with more than 10,000 employees might be as much as $50,000 per year. The most common groups are for LGBT employees, followed by women, then Black, Hispanic, and Asian workers. ERGs also extend to military veterans and people with disabilities. When they're trying to push their agenda, they always like to mention the military veterans and people with disabilities. They usually put those first. You can always have groups that help military veterans and people with disabilities. Because you're a woman, because you're Black or Hispanic or Asian, you do not have a disability. Even if you're LGBT, you do not have a disability. You have also not earned back from society what a military veteran has earned back from society. That's an entitlement those people should have. Military veterans have served their country, have risked themselves for you and for your freedom and for society. The other categories have not, and they need to be de-emphasized. The idea is to help members navigate corporate life and foster a sense of belonging. They might meet over sandwiches to hear a guest speaker like the CEO, or help organize an event for the company's Pride or Women's History Month celebrations. All of that's fine, there just should not be $1 from the company going to any of these groups. These days, fewer and fewer companies are funding ERGs. In 2020, 78% of all ERGs received money from their host companies. By 2023, that figure had dropped to 70%, and that was before conservative criticism of DEI at places like Harvard University made news worldwide. And along the way, some critics have also accused ERGs of bigotry. Leaner times on Wall Street and in technology aren't helping. For bosses, DEI looks like a relatively easy place to make cuts. Employees might be unhappy, but business will mostly go on. To Matthew Ledger, the message is worrying. Quote, when you pull away these tiny dollar figures during economic downturns, that sends a signal to the employee that it was a smokescreen. Quote, you're telling your employees, I don't actually care about opening that line of communication with you, and I don't care about the community that you have. Well, you shouldn't care about opening lines of communication. You get hired to do a job. You should do your job. It would be nice if people felt respected for their work and acknowledged for their work, but not for their skin color, not for their gender or sexual preference. That's not appropriate in a workplace. Paulina Rios has seen the shift up close. Like anyone, Rios wanted to feel welcome at work. So the designer joined several ERGs at Block Incorporated, the financial tech firm founded by Jack Dorsey. Today, her hopes of fostering an inclusive workplace at Block have been turned upside down. Are these just is it just a social environment at work? Are you just playing around all day at work and saying, hey, can we just have a good time and be with people who look like me and believe the same things as me? How about just do your work? Rios and several others involved in the ERG for Indigenous employees were caught up in recent layoffs. She said the group suffered setbacks and that employees have pulled back from other ERGs at Block too, given the leaner times at the company. Quote, they're dying out because everyone's so freaked out about the potential layoffs, Rios said of ERGs. Yes, there isn't time to play at work if companies are having a difficult time. You've got to show that you're someone who's literally there to work when you go to work. A spokesperson for Block wouldn't comment specifically on Rios' experience, but said that the Indigenous employee group remains active among 14 ERGs at the company. The layoffs were company-wide and structured to avoid bias, the spokesperson added. Similar trends appear to be playing out elsewhere. Since mid-2023, some ERGs have reported that fewer people are turning up for events and stepping into the voluntary leadership roles, said Dumbai Egbuna, co-founder of Chezi, which provides software and support for companies to manage ERG programs. It's become clear that many ERG leaders have been caught up in corporate layoffs, she said. Yeah, maybe because they want people to focus on work, I don't know. Most companies still seem to be willing and able to fund employee groups, but Egbuna said a substantial minority, maybe 1 in 5, is showing visible erosion of support. Many higher-ups are reviewing DEI efforts across the board. Quote, employees don't necessarily feel safe to participate in ERGs, Egbuna said. DEI professionals are keeping their heads down, she said. Egbuna pointed to an education technology company that cut its DEI budget in half between 2020 and 2023. The move coincided with layoffs last year, she said. Reversals like that are particularly disappointing after so many companies rushed to issue "We Stand With You" statements following the death of George Floyd, employees and diversity advocates say. Since losing her job at Block, Rios has found work at a gallery in Phoenix specializing in indigenous art. She looks back and wonders how things changed so quickly. The ERG for indigenous employees only had a budget of $2,000. But as part of her job, she occasionally spoke to Dorsey. She said she felt like she was helping people understand different perspectives and build a better workplace. If you are actually building a better workplace, your employer will not fire you. But better isn't that you enjoy being there and other people feel comfortable working there. Better is actual legitimate productivity. Quantifiable productivity. Otherwise, you really are wasting your time, and they're going to let you go as soon as they have a budget cut. Seeing how quickly bosses can change course was a tough lesson, Rios said. Quote, people may now be more reluctant to join ERGs, especially to lead them, she said. Because if you join this ERG and you're the leader of this group, yes, as Paulina Rios found out, your owner of the company will see you there and they'll say, oh, you're the person that leads the indigenous group, or you're the person that leads that other ERG group. You're not the person that's creating value for the company. So when they say, hey, we need to focus on producing some value here, our investors are a little disappointed the company is in a little bit of trouble right now, they're not going to go to the leaders of ERG groups and try to say, how do we make indigenous people feel, or white people or black people or LGBT people feel more comfortable at the company? They're going to be looking at how do we cut costs? How do we increase productivity? If you don't fit in with cutting costs or creating more productivity for your company, you're not going to have job security. Not in bad times, not even really in good times. If you're not necessary, ultimately they will get rid of you. So be sure you add actual value at work no matter what you do. And value doesn't mean making it a fun place to work. Value means creating results for your company, real business results. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.